Hello and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown. I'm joined as always by James and Alan. Guys, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. I don't think there's been much going on in the world of Celtic with it being the international break. Have I missed something, James?
I know I've been out of commission. In an 84-hour period, I drove 20 hours in the last 4 days. Not including the last like 16 hours, but so I'm miserable. I'm tired. So I don't know what's going on. What has happened? You guys are gonna have to clue me in.
Yeah, listen, Alan. I've had my phone off for a week, so I've got no idea.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's rumours of a few injuries in training. So we're all wondering who's going to play. Tori Olsen might be also, not fit, so we're wondering who might play right back on. Yeah, that's about it. I can't think of anything else much to say really.
We jest, of course, we jest. We have been abreast of all developments at Celtic. Obviously, well, since the last time I was on, there was the debacle that was the closing of the transfer window and all that entailed. I know that you guys have debunked that ad nauseum. And then since then again, we've had the story from inside sources of a leak of dissatisfaction with Brendan Rodgers and his comments to none other than the Sun newspaper. The less said about that, the better. And then the statement from the Celtic board. Now, we're aware because of timelines and because of the way things work that a lot of people listening to this will have probably listened to most of the other Celtic fan outlets and will have heard lots of opinions on the statement. So, James, I think our aim today is to, yes, talk about it, but try and give a little bit more nuance to some of the thoughts that we have around some of the content of that statement, and to talk about other things, most importantly of all, what might happen on the pitch as a result of everything that's happened.
Yeah, our goal is to stick to brand a little bit, try to put some meat on the bone as far as why most of what was in the statement was nonsense. I'll give it the rated G for young people that might be listening, or someone else in the car listening. Is just absolute nonsense was in the statement. Starting with the comments about FSR and the squad management, recruitment. I mean, it was just straw men right and left. I mean, I thought I was watching The Wizard of Oz with the amount of straw men I was seeing, or reading. So yeah, we'll do our best here to maybe put some numbers to it and talk about what's the state of the squad and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's not muck around, Alan. I'll come to you first. Anybody who wants to know my thoughts on the statement, I mean, I'll chip in where I can here, but although I don't like to do it, I do share my opinion on Twitter sometimes, so you can find it there if you want to know my thoughts on it. But Alan, I'll come to you first. Was there any particular parts of the statement, obviously excluding those that I think other people have addressed, that really stood out to you for any particular reason?
No, I mean, obviously, I have read it, but I can't actually remember what it said specifically. But I do remember how it made me feel. And I think that's where I am with this. I think we're at a pretty sad point, actually. I've seen folk, parse, break it down, etc., tearing it limb from limb, and God bless them. God bless them for that. I just feel there's a bigger picture here, which is to recognise that we are in what family lawyers would call irreconcilable differences territory. A disagreement so serious it cannot be resolved. The Celtic hierarchy told their truth, and we should believe them when they do that they truly believe what they've told us. And, I don't mean that the content of what they said, but the sentiment of what they said is honestly held. I've seen people say, oh, they hate us. They don't hate us. Hate comes through emotion and some, residual notion of still caring. It's very difficult to hate something or somebody without still holding on to some care about the object of your hate. But this Celtic hierarchy is utterly indifferent to us. They view us with complete contempt, total disregard. So listen, all information is useful, or can be, and we now know this, right? And here we are, as they say. So armed with that knowledge, we can move beyond any notions of, and I would hold up my hand to this, hoping that things get better. Let's hope that things get better. If we work at the relationship, things will get better if we just try a little bit harder. And I feel we can now put that to one side, get on with divorce proceedings, and winning back custody of our club. This will not be easy. In fact, it will be very difficult and very time-consuming, not to mention expensive in terms of money it will take to buy folk out, the damage that may be caused to the team on the park in the interim. I think the unity shown across the Celtic support, the supporters associations, affiliations is remarkable, and a testament to the depth and the strength of feeling. Who knew that these custodians were bestowed with such heroic skills and able to unify the support in this way? So we can get into some of the details of it if you want, because it's probably quite entertaining. But I think we've gone now beyond a point of no return in terms of this relationship. I think it's over.
Yeah, I mean, Alan referenced some of the people who have parsed at great length the statement. He might be relating to or commenting on the fact that I sent him my thoughts in great detail in a Word document to say, here's my thoughts line by line of why I think they're talking nonsense. And what a treat Alan did. Well, I believe you asked for access to the document, so I believe you maybe read it, but so Alan knows my thoughts on it. James, I think Alan makes a really good point there, that without going into the detail of it, what it was dripping with was condescension and contempt for me. I'm sitting talking to two very intelligent guys. I like to think of myself as quite intelligent. I know plenty of Celtic supporters who are more intelligent than you would believe, who hold offices of high standing in all walks of life. And the idea that these guys sitting in this boardroom think they are above every single person who puts their hand in their pocket and lines their pockets with their hard-earned money. I just couldn't believe how brazen they were with it. Am I reacting too emotionally to what I read?
No, I think the visceral emotional response is not only fair, but to be expected given the nature of what they wrote. I spent much of the summer trying to lay out a case or my argument as to why the club had not been well run over the long term, why a lot of the perceived aspects, the domestic trophy count, the cash balance, 3 successive seasons of Champions League qualification directly, the player trading over the last few seasons was mostly or disproportionately due to factors outwit their control, and that we were potentially reaching an inflection point of their self-assessment being slapped upside the head with reality. Now we'll see if that takes place on the pitch outside of the Champions League qualification, which was its own unique disaster. But what takes place for the rest of the season, there's a lot of questions in that regard domestically. But I think the way that they addressed this crystallized the mediocrity or worse that's taking place on the part of people that are the decision makers, the major decision makers. I mean, it was a laughably pathetic attempt to rebut the circumstances of what's going on. I mean, to use the tactics that they did, they wouldn't have won like a primary school debate club contest. Like they got, a bunch of 10-year-olds would have wiped the floor with them on grounds of logical fallacies, of appeals to authority, of straw man arguments, of brazenly lying about certain things. I mean, the sections on FSR are it's just ridiculous.
Let's get into the detail on that, James, because you in particular are much better placed than I to break that down, and Alan is as well. I mean, what are some of the elements of what you saw in the statements in relation to FSR that stood out to you, because we were talking about it before we came on air, and it was almost, for anybody that even slightly understands what they're talking about in terms of the rules around finances in football, they were almost admitting complete incompetence with some of the stuff that they were claiming were reasons for making it difficult to make player transfers and things like that. But what stood out for you in that regard?
Yeah, so the big number that everyone's focused on now, because it kicks off this season, the 25-26 season, is the squad cost ratio, which is limited to 70%. And the first thing is that we don't know. There's no transparency on this. So the clubs aren't, for the most part, I mean, UEFA knows, but you kind of have to guesstimate based off of what's shown in the financial statements to back into it. So to a lot of people, again, within the fan media, looking at Swiss Ramble, who estimates it, I think, reasonably. I think most people would consider Swiss Ramble an expert in these topics, just taking kind of a rote 75% of the reported wage bill to get into a number that would get you towards what is applicable to the specific ratio criteria that UEFA has set out at that 70%. So if you look at that just basic number, and again, I'm not going to get into all the specific numbers, but Swiss Ramble had his estimate of last season at 43%. So the limit's 70%. That's at 43%. Okay, well, I'm not suggesting that's like a fair one, because that was based off of a Champions League season. So you can do some gymnastics and some pro forma type analysis. And what I would say is that they look to be running this ratio at 70%, assuming we play no European football. None. Okay, so that seems to be the level that they're operating at. Now, is that strategic? I don't know. Like, I think I've thought that the kind of heuristic has been Europa League qualification assumption, and even if we end up in the Conference League, because of what's going on with the coefficient that I think a lot of people are aware of now, with how ominous that looks for the country coefficient for the clubs, is you're still talking, way below. So this idea that there's no room to invest in the squad is just patently absurd. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And that's ignoring any additional increases in player trading profits. Like, that goes into the ratio too. So I'm just saying, if you look at pure operating revenue in a Champions League season, I think will be probably between 105 to 110 million is a reasonable expectation. And if you take 70% of that, everyone could do the math. That's an easy one, right? 77 million, right around in there. We're nowhere near that. I mean, it's just, so this idea that they're constrained because they're being conservative, it's nonsense. There's degrees of conservative, and then there's degrees of just incompetence. So Alan and I have talked consistently about applauding the ethos of being relatively conservative and the legacy of the McCann Revolution and all of that being very healthy. But to come out with this line of argument as to why they failed in this transfer window is just, it's not credible. It's not believable. It's just making crap up, in my view. So that makes people even angrier, I think, understandably, because you're just getting, the modern way of saying it is gaslit. They're gaslighting us. I'm more old school. To me, it's like someone's peeing on you and telling you it's raining, or there's all kinds of more colorful ways that we can describe this, but it's infuriating because it's just not credible. So they either know they're lying or they're grossly incompetent. Neither of those are really, comforting.
Yeah, Alan, that was actually the question I was going to pose to you, but I get that there's not a real answer whether they are being incompetent or deliberately deceptive, and that's not something any of us can know. But I think what James says there about, what we know about the finances compared to what they're claiming about the finances don't entirely match up, and to put it across to the supporters as that they can't just throw money at things, which is a phrase that they used. I guess that, again, to go back to my original point, just kind of underestimates the support and what we are able to establish for ourselves, given the information that we have, compared to what they try to tell us.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the brickbats that get thrown at Celtic fans, for example, every time there's some kind of financial statement out of Ibrox, the tagline is there'll be a number of people that will reply, "Oh, let's await the East End accountants," etc., etc. And listen, that's well earned, right? That is, let's not beat about the bush. That is well earned. You know, Celtic fans were the only people, some fans of other clubs, that deconstructed the Rangers' finances, 10, 15 years ago, that laid out how and why they were in serious financial trouble, because the Rangers fans certainly weren't going to do it, and the Scottish media certainly wasn't going to do it. And this interest in finances in general is something I think the Celtic fans, again, have earned those brickbats through genuinely being interested and trying to have people talk about these things in an informed way. Yes, there's a lot of crap spoken, and of course there is, but social media. But generally speaking, it's a relatively well-informed, support. Now, to not know that as a club, that you're speaking to a support that is engaged, that is knowledgeable, that is active, that is participatory, that will have read and dissected Celtic's accounts within minutes of them being published, and there'll be blogs about them, and there'll be expert opinion, there'll be this, that, and the other. If they don't know that, I don't know what they're doing in terms of their job. So, I mean, the whole FSR section, as James has said, it's either incompetence or they're deliberately lying. This notion, we can't spend the money that's in the bank because it will upset our FSR. So you're basically telling what you're saying is, right. So we were told, and I believe it is true, that Celtic were key contributors to the framing of the FSR framework, and because Celtic knew some of the risks that they were trying to mitigate through this framework, through their experience of what Rangers had tried to get away with in the early part of this century. And so they knew some of the loopholes that needed closing, and some of the ways that the regulations could be framed and also implemented as a framework that would basically stop some of the shenanigans that we saw, in the early 2000s. None more so, by the way, than UEFA taking the lead in auditing and verification of returns, rather than leaving it to the local regulator, i.e. the SFA, who, as we know, were just waving it through. It's all good, it's all good. So Celtic were in the room and were a key part. So they're telling me that, having participated in framing these things, they don't know how to implement them themselves as a football club. You're expecting me to believe that every year we're having all these massive cash reserves, and they're going, if we don't spend this, we won't be able to spend it next year because FSR won't let us. Oh, just stick it in the account, it'll be fine. And we've been doing this for years, and we didn't realise that we wouldn't be able to spend it. And they want us to believe that. I mean, if that's true, then they all need sacked anyway. You know what I mean? It is, as James says, it comes down to, it's incompetence or you're lying to us. Take your pick. Whatever it is, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's as if we built the garden shed standing inside it and forgot to cut a hole for the door. It's like that is the equivalent of, what we would be doing if we've come up with the rules for FSR and then found it difficult to meet them. But Alan, I'll come back to you on it. To move the conversation on a little bit, the statement has been picked apart, as we've talked about ad nauseum. I think it's clear, without going into too much more detail on it, where the three of us stand on it. There's been a lot of discussion around how Celtic fans deal with this. Even before the statement came out, how do we take action? How do we materially affect the board in a way that is going to make them stand up and take notice? Now, the statements are coming out from the fan bodies. The Huddle Breakdown is a co-signator on a letter with numerous other fan organisations, supporters, club associations, and other fan media outlets, and that does appear to have had some impact. But there are discussions among fans about, not buying merchandise, not buying consumables at the stadium during match days, not attending matches altogether, coming out of the home cup ticket scheme. Alan, where do you stand on that in terms of your opinion on whether it would be effective and whether it would have the impact that some people think it might?
Yeah, so firstly, I want to give credit to, I think it's the North Curve account that's been coordinating the letter. They also sent out something today with a questionnaire about what the next actions are, and I'll come on to that in a second. And as I say, the signatories have been added day by day to that letter, and the Celtic Supporters Association and the affiliation of Celtic supporters and affiliation of Irish Celtic supporters clubs, very august bodies that have good access to the club, have all effectively given the board a vote of no confidence, which is kind of symbolic, but it's nevertheless, I think, an unprecedented step. In terms of moving forward then, and to speak to maybe that, as you said, that kind of questionnaire which was asking about would you support, as you say, not buying Europa League tickets, or not buying merchandise, or not turning up to the ground till 10 minutes late, or sitting in silence, and all these sort of things. The tactics that won the war in 1994 are not relevant and are not going to work now. Okay, so let's be very, very clear about that. The Kellys and the Whites didn't have any money. There were only about less than maybe 10,000 season ticket holders. You could literally starve them out, and it wouldn't take that long. The bank foreclosure threat was hanging over them for some time. The fans had leverage of not giving the board their money, and they effectively could force regime change, providing somebody, Fergus, John Keane, etc., coming up with the money, obviously, was the key hinge point. So those tactics, I don't think, they're obviously not going to work. We're not going to starve them out, because we've just joked they've got a lot of money in the bank. How long do you think it's going to take to starve them out? I mean, let's get real about this. So the issue isn't that the club's not got a lot of money and they can be starved out. And by the way, 55,000 season ticket holders, they've got your money. Now, yes, there's cup ties, yes, there's Europa League packages that haven't been, purchased yet. So listen, I'm going to give you my opinion. The reason I'm saying that is, there is no Huddle Breakdown 3-line whip here. There's no corporate kind of pod policy on any of this. This is my view. James will have his view. Laura, you'll have your view, and we can all give it on this platform. My personal view is that anything which damages the team, the manager, or the team, the players on the pitch, anything that hinders performance on the pitch, to me is not something I would really want to support. I think it's completely counterproductive. It will do more harm to us. It's self-harm is what I'm trying to say. It will hurt us. The only people that will benefit are our rivals. Do you really want to do that? So I would avoid anything like that. And also, and I'm going to be very cynical here, but one of the points that we've talked about many times is you really don't want to give professional footballers an excuse not to play well, because they will take it. They bloody well will, right? If Brendan Rodgers comes out after we draw 1-1 at Kilmarnock and go, wow, we had the fans were silent, we had no support, the lads weren't feeling it, it was all this bollocks, and that's what will happen, right? So let's not give Brendan any excuses. Let's not give the players any excuses. Let's get behind them. Let's support them. They are ultimately the victims in all of this as well, in terms of the lack of support from the club, in terms of augmenting the sport. Never forget, Callum McGregor actually came out and said this. I mean, this is remarkable. If you're a Callum McGregor, Kremlinologist, that was utterly remarkable that McGregor would openly state and say anything that could be construed in any way as being disruptive to the Celtic organisation. Callum McGregor is not your man. So he must have felt that absolutely sincerely and passionately, that he felt he had to say that the squad needed help, which they didn't get. So damaging the team in any way, not cheering, shouting, but again, not buying things from the club. What's that going to do? It's going to frighten off sponsors. It's going to, it's going to jeopardise future revenues for the clubs. Revenues aren't the issue here. The club's got plenty of money. That's not going to make any difference. The only way that this will get resolved is through shareholder pressure, pressure on the board from other shareholders, which and I know that's boring, and it's time consuming, as I've said before. It will take a lot of coordination. It'll take a lot of patience. It'll take a lot of soft politics. It'll take a lot of people parking egos, people parking feelings for other wealthy Celtic supporters and all something, or other Celtic supporters, and getting together and support. The general support have got a place in this. That's not to say there can't be protests against the board. It's not to say there can't be direct action as long as it's peaceful and not hurting anybody. That can still happen, but I would leave it to either before the game, after the game, not during the game. It's just my view, right? I just don't see any benefit in trying to hurt the team or the players or the manager in their duties. We need to get behind them, because this isn't the media in Scotland. They have cake, they eat cake on this issue, because whenever Celtic beat, let's say, beat St Mirren 4-0, let's just, I'm not picking on St Mirren, just first thing that came into my head, it's like you'll get all the shock jocks and the cynics in the media, the well-known names. I'm not going to name them. We know who know who they are. Ooh, Celtic in brackets wage bill X beat St Mirren in brackets wage bill Y 4-0. Ooh, aren't they clever? Isn't Brendan Rodgers an elite manager? And it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. And then at the same time, and then in the next week when we lose to St Mirren, it's like and we moan about it and say, well, why didn't why? It's like, God, you're so entitled. It's like, have cake, eat cake, right? It's just fantastic. So listen, so what is true, what is absolutely true, is that we should be beating most teams in Scotland, not because of any sense of entitlement. It's just a matter of football economics. It's simple as that. So we need to keep Celtic as strong as we can be. We're not in a 2021 situation in terms of the environmental factors around that season, and we're not going to get anywhere by, as I say, not supporting the team. That's just my view. Others will have different views. I respect that. That's just my view.
Yeah, I will give my view in a second, but James, I do want to get yours. You're in a slightly different position in terms of the perspective on it, because you are obviously a long distance supporter who has a limited number of ways in which you can engage with and interact with and support the club in comparison to your average match going fan or anything like that. Where do you stand on the discussions around the potential courses of action supporters are talking about to make their feelings known to the board?
Yeah, I'm a laissez-faire person on this kind of thing. I think people need to do what they think they need to do, kind of their own conscience. I'm not one to kind of preach to others on morality or what they should be doing and judging them. So if people that are canceling the home cup ticket scheme, I think that's, and I don't, as Alan said, outside of getting personal with people or getting doing anything that's illegal or anything like that. Like, as long as it's legal, peaceful, whether it's restricting money from the club or protesting, I think it's all fine. I don't see a problem with any of it. I tend to agree with Al. My personal view is I'd probably not want to do it towards the players and or the manager or the coaching staff, outside of good faith criticism on podcast after games when we Monday morning quarterback, that kind of thing, with our obvious self-interest in that regard, fully disclosed. But yeah, I think there's only one time I've kind of made a financial decision of withholding money from the club. It was, I guess it was 2020 or 2021, when they engaged Dahua, the Chinese company, as a commercial sponsor, and it just put me off a lot. I didn't like that. So I had canceled my Celtic TV subscription at the time, but I wasn't out, I tweeted a couple of things about it. I was like, I can't believe the club did this, whatever. Like, but I wasn't out there preaching to other people, you've got to do it. So I think people just need to make their own decisions. And I think my fear, now that's my personal like stuff. My analyst hat when I put that on, my fear is that we're somewhere around the peak of unison, because inevitably what happens is everyone's kind of emotionally responding to just the egregious crap that we've consumed in the last 7 days, and inevitably that will start to age a bit, and then all of these kind of idiosyncratic elements within the support, people with very strong views, then start to infight, and things can get a little complicated, and then you have people acting in bad faith that try to do things for their own benefit as opposed to the collective, and it just gets a lot harder as you go on. It becomes a war of attrition more so, and it's hard to keep everybody on the same page. So it would only be normal that some of that stuff will begin to seep in. But I think it's great that everyone's kind of come together in this way. I worry that it inevitably, because as Alan said, this is not a short-term thing because of the resources of the people that control the club and the club itself. So it will definitely require patience, and I think everyone's kind of do their own thing to try and stay on board with themselves and not get judgy with other people. That would be my preference.
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with where I was going to go with it. So again, to reiterate what Alan and James are saying, I don't think any of us would ever dream of telling other people what to do, mostly because none of the three of us particularly like being told what to do either. So it's kind of that position where you make your own decisions, you go on your own morals or your own base of the information that you have and the decision that you think is right. From my point of view, I'm in quite a unique position. So I was a season ticket holder of some form for around 10 years. I then had 10 years away from being a season ticket holder because of circumstances out with football, and then joined the waiting list during COVID, at which point I then got to the top of the waiting list this summer and made the decision at that point to purchase a season ticket. So I am a current season ticket holder. And I have to admit, I've been conflicted because the excitement of being a season ticket holder again, the excitement of knowing that I had regular matches to go to, that I had an opportunity to really get invested in watching and supporting the team again, has been met with this resistance because of circumstances where the home cup ticket scheme that I had just signed up to, people are now saying you're not a real supporter unless you withdraw yourself from that. And then other people are saying you're not a real supporter unless you support the team at every turn. And if you're, God forbid, you're caught buying a Diet Coke at the stalls, then you're a total scab. And it's like there's all these voices and things coming in trying to influence you as to what your behavior should be. From my personal point of view, and this is me and me alone, I have made the decision to support Celtic at football matches. I will continue to do that at whatever football matches they play and I have access to tickets to. Would I prefer to be in the Champions League? Absolutely. Does the fact that we are not in the Champions League mean that I will then not support them in the Europa League if I get the chance to by being there in person? For me, no. I personally will continue to support them because I think, as Alan said and as James has said, there are other ways that you can make yourself heard to the board. And I think, Alan, to come back to your point, it's a different situation to the 90s. There was a specific reason why boycotting the games at that point was of material value. And although it would be making a very big statement for there to be an empty stadium, ultimately I think it would do damage to the players on the pitch more than it would to anybody else, because my ultimate feeling as well is that a lot of what we do will not matter to the board. The statement itself shows that they believe that they're doing the right thing anyway, and therefore, the actions that we take, while they will make an impact of some kind, I don't know how much material difference they will make to the actions that the board takes. And so I think the other avenues that we've discussed during the podcast are the ways that we need to, it might take longer, it might be more frustrating, it might require a lot more hard work, but I think that ultimately that could be for the most prolonged benefit in the end. So some people listening to this might not agree, but I will be there on a Thursday night with my scarf in the air, supporting the team as I always do. I will be happy to see people there doing the same if they choose to. And if you choose not to, that is your choice as a Celtic supporter, and I think everybody's entitled to that. Alan, you've prepared a few slides. Everybody loves a slideshow on Huddle Breakdown. We're known for it. But you've prepared a few slides on the current situation within the squad and a particular aspect of the current situation with the squad that you feel might affect us going forward. Do you want to break that down a little bit more for us in terms of the current squad we have and where we are and what the future might hold for the current crop of players?
Yeah, I mean, this is in the spirit, really, of, we could sit here for another 20 minutes and bump our gums and why we hate the board. But, really, the key thing is, and to your point about supporting the team, and my perspective, which again, it's just my opinion, other people have other opinions, that's great, is that, support the team, because boy, are they going to need it this season. Really, they are going to need it. And the reason that I say that is because, years now of mismanagement and poor squad management in general has led us to a situation where we're carrying into the season a number of risks. We've talked about some of them. I wrote about Callum McGregor and his performance. And really, whilst the focus of my article was about Callum McGregor, it's on the Substacks site on huddlebreakdown.com. I had a question in my mind which I didn't try to answer because I don't know the answer, which was how much of McGregor's performance degradation that we're seeing in the early part of the season is down to Callum McGregor, and how much of it is down to the systemic weaknesses in the team, the way that Rodgers has set the team up, the lack of strength in other parts of the team that are making it weaker, etc. Question. That's a question, right? But it almost doesn't matter with it what the answer is, and the answer will be a percentage attribution between these two things. I don't know how you want to, you want to split it 60-40, 40-60, 70. It doesn't matter, because the point is that I was highlighting one key risk in the current season and the current team, which is one of many that we're carrying into the season. And what that means is that, not all of these risks will manifest into issues, but the more risks there are, the more likely they will manifest into issues. And the more risks that manifest into issues, the more likely other risks will manifest into issues. And there's like a multiplying effect, and that all impacts on performance. So I wanted to touch on another aspect of the squad that concerns me, because it's directly relevant to the conversation about what's been happening at Celtic in terms of recruitment over a large number of years now. Because, irrespective of who the coach has been, irrespective of whether in the Champions League or Europa League, the reason that we're at this point of divorce proceedings, in my mind, is because this is just the latest in years of mismanagement at Celtic. Despite the League Cups, and despite the leagues, and despite the Scottish Cups, the performances in Europe are the true benchmark, and they have, by and large, been at best average and at worst abject. And that is the true, as it comes back to what I said about the competitive environment in Scotland. It's not great. Celtic are by far the better resourced team. A multitude of poor performance can be masked over by beating teams the size of Motherwell and Falkirk and all that. But in Europe, you don't get away with it. And guess what? We haven't, right? So that is the benchmark. And another area that I'm concerned about, really, and again, direct consequence of the mismanagement of the resources, of the key resources of the club, which is footballers, is the actual average age of the first team squad. So this is this century. Now, this is actually quite interesting. Let me just speak about this, because it's just an interesting little jog through the the history of the squad this century, is you'll see that in the early part of the century, under Martin O'Neill, the squad average age was above 27. We know that O'Neill ran with a small squad, with a very small core group of first starting players and very little depth behind, and very little appetite for bringing through younger players. And then, we know as well that we got to the Seville final, and that was the teachable moment for Celtic and the board. It was probably in many ways the most important financial inflection point, let's call it, this century, because what it taught the Celtic board is you can have all these superstars, you can get to a European final, and you'll still lose money. Okay, so that was a teachable moment for the Celtic board, and their policy has been consistent ever since. I think it's been flawed, and as I say, it hasn't evolved. And that in business, if you don't evolve, you're going backwards. You're not standing still, you're going backwards. So Strachan came in. The age of the squad went down. We spent less money on wages, less money on players, and then it went down again when Rangers were liquidated, and they had the Ronnie Deila experiment. I think the club was almost deliberately going down this road of saying, right, we've got a sort of new inexperienced coach. We're going to encourage starting to purchase younger, less heralded talent from various countries. So it's almost a deliberate attempt to feel that they were in a safe place, given that the new Rangers were starting life in the bottom divisions, and would be a number of years before they appeared again in the top. They appeared in the top division for the first time. That they could do that. And so really 2012-13 is where the average age of the squad was actually just over 23, between 23 and a half. And then it's been, unfortunately, as the competitive dynamics with the new Rangers being in the top division, that reality of having more of a competitor in that sense, there has been a slight uptick in age, but it went down a little bit, 1920, 2021, before rising again at the end of Postecoglou's reign. But jumping forward now to today, and it's right up again. In fact, it's the highest it's ever been this century. It's nearly up to 28, average age of 28 throughout the squad. Now, you might argue, you might say, well, don't you need experienced squad to compete in Europe? We've got all these games now in the Europa League, and you don't win anything with kids, and blah 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 blah. And there's some merit to some of those arguments in context. But if we go to the next piece, I just want to kind of lay out really why this isn't a good thing. And I don't think this has happened by design. I think it's happened by poor squad management. Older players generally have larger wages. Generally when you're granting players who are older their next contract, it's usually on more money. So you're actually spending more money on older players. Older players also have a declining resale value. Clearly, as the older they get, the less attractive they are, especially in a more data-driven marketplace, where although improvements in sports science and so forth have probably extended players' careers to some extent, you're not getting the same. You cannot have the same dynamism at 28, 29 as you had when you were 21, 22. It's just a biological fact. And therefore, if your resale value is going down, then your estimate for what future revenues you may get from your squad when you eventually do sell them is declining as well. And then obviously older players, have collectively a physical decline. And unfortunately, we're seeing this. We're seeing this with Cameron Carter-Vickers. We're seeing it with Kieran Tierney in what could be, quite a dramatic way. Sadly, if the first few games of the season are anything to go by. And that actually has an impact on the effectiveness of the team on the pitch. This is a team that for the last 4 or 5 years has relied on a high pressing game. Well, if your players are in physical decline, you're not going to be able to press as effectively. It's really that simple. Also, you just can't play as quickly. Celtic are facing low blocks. The way to beat those is to move the ball quickly. It relies on speed of thought, speed of movement, speed of the ball. All these things decrease in terms of a player's ability with age. And then the last point is the potential for toxic combinations in terms of having areas of the pitch where you might have one or two or three players who are all perhaps a bit older, and therefore, all these issues become amplified in that particular part of the field. Also, it's an indication that we're not refreshing the team from the academy, and it's also indicative of as I've said, that my point here is an indicative of a lack of squad management planning. I keep coming back to the bit that some people hate me saying, which is when I mentioned Carter Vickers 27-28, Hatate 27-28, Maeda 27-28. These players are now probably past their peak asset value. And we're seeing with Carter Vickers, the increasing wear and tear and the impacts he's having on his body. Are these players going to improve? Is Maeda going to have another season like he did last season? A club like Celtic has to be looking at these things and thinking, when's the best age, when's the best point to sell these players, which means they get their next big paycheck, they get their next big move, they go forward in their careers, as Hatate wants to do, as Maeda wants to do. This isn't about Celtic kicking them out the door. It's about everybody getting a win-win. Celtic get a good fee, they invest it in a younger player, the player gets their next big payday, they probably double, triple their wages if they go to one of the big top 5 leagues. So it's a win-win if you do this properly, and it's a lose-lose if you don't. You end up with unhappy players who are declining physically, that the club are going to get less from and make less money from if they ever do sell them. And as James talks about more authoritatively than I can, but the trend across Europe, especially in the non-Big 5 leagues, is that squads are getting younger. We've seen 2 great examples that are in our immediate horizons as we all watch that Club Brugge side. They sold a lot of players, they promoted a lot of young players up into their first team. And Brugge are losing to Union Saint-Gilloise, right? And they're doing this far better than we are, and we're not acting like that at all. So we're miles behind even a Brugge model, which isn't even best in class, by the way. And as we're about to see when we play Red Star Belgrade will happily play 18, 19-year-olds against us, and some of them will be pretty good. So watch out for that one. So this is all bringing back the impact of what we've seen. The board performance, what we're talking about here, has real material impact on the pitch, and this is but one example.
Yeah, another club who do the same as Dinamo Zagreb, who we faced not too long ago. Very well-known club over a number of years for fielding their young talent and getting them game time and moves early. So it's you could probably go through. Atalanta is another one who've had a lot of success in recent years for the same reason. So all fair points. The only question I have for you, James, at the moment, I'm joking, I do have another question for you, but are the Huddle Breakdown an example of a toxic age decline combination?
Yes, 100%, without a doubt. We are aged out. So yeah, we need to recruit some youth at some point. There's no question, because Alan and I can't keep going on like this in perpetuity.
Now you brought it up, I feel authorized to be very rude now. So when we lost Enda, it was like selling Ben Doak and getting Aaron Moy instead.
Oh my God! Set myself up for that one.
You deserve that.
I should probably just shave my head at this point and go the whole hog. I will be the Huddle Breakdown's Aaron Moy. Enda is a lovely young man, I have to say. No, James, I guess to further Alan's point, it's amazing to sit here and watch you guys break down these figures and things like that, because it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. It's a lack of planning that leads to these situations. It's a lack of a coherent strategy that leads to Ida going down to Swansea and coming back up and not knowing if he was going to be sold, to having Yang and Maeda in the team who, for all intents and purposes, has had moves lined up and now don't. And it's being reflected in things like the average age of the squad. We are sitting in a situation where there are players who should have been moved on long ago who haven't been. and potentially are now past what you would consider to be their peak saleable asset age. How do we turn this around?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we do with the current leadership. They made that clear, and I think that's the, Alan and I have railed on and on and on about how data is a distraction from the reality of the huge shift that's taken place in the industry. The football industry as a sport is the trend towards getting smarter. This is about using data as a tool to implement analytics, to extrapolate, and to basically figure stuff out, how to gain competitive advantages. And so it's all about getting smarter. And that, I recorded and we released this week an interview that I did with Ted Knutson back in July. We just put it out during the international break here. And Ted mentioned in it that Celtic were actually an early adopter of stats. By the way, Ted was the founder of StatsBomb, co-founder. Him and a woman's founded StatsBomb, which is now, when Al and I talk about things like on-ball value and all these other things, like StatsBomb is generally considered the top high-quality data vendor. It's now owned by a company called Huddle, which also owns Scout, et cetera. But that's who Ted sold it to. But that Celtic were an early adopter of StatsBomb data in, I think, 2018. And one of our subscribers, Frank, put a comment under the interview, goes, well, what the hell are they doing with it? They've had this great data since 2018. What are they doing? And again, Alan and I have said repeatedly, the data is important. The quality is better than less quality. High quality is better than low quality. But ultimately, it's about culture, people, and using the tools at your disposal to get smarter. And that's why I've been pretty consistent in the toolkit that I have from an analytics background in ramping up and ascending the learning curve of the football industry of data and related analytics over the last 6-7 years. Is I became highly confident that the people running Celtic don't know what they're doing. Because if you have a heuristic of using the available high quality data with a reasonable analytics background, it's clear and obvious using reasonable benchmarking, reasonable attribution, that they're not using it. So, and this is, I forget who it was recently that talked about it, and Ted and I mentioned it in the conversation, is that, if you're a CEO or a football club in the modern era, like right now, you can't say we don't use data because you look like a horse's ass. It's a minimum. It's like being a corporate CEO and saying, oh, we don't, that AI nonsense, that's crap. Like, why would we be doing anything with AI? So they all start putting money into AI and doing all this stuff, or football data. Whether they're using it or not, or whether they're actually leveraging it to make money or make smart decisions, is a totally separate issue. And the vast majority of football clubs are still not using it to get smarter. They're using it as, like I joke, they use it like they use McKinsey, which is to basically cover up what they want to do anyway. Consultants, people hire consultants to, to come up with a report that, fits the conclusion that they wanted anyway. So that's how most football clubs are being run. That's how Celtic are being run. They have vast majority of the information and, the data and probably a lot of models that they could use to make smarter decisions. They're not doing it. And that the statement ultimately, like Alan just showed with the squad management, whether it's the academy, whether it's the squad management, whether it's recruitment, when properly benchmarked, they're not doing a good job. So they listed all of the criteria out in their own statement saying, hey, we're doing a great job. Trust us. It's not true. Using kind of like, 101 level analytics. We're not talking about, theoretical physicist level of modeling here. This is relatively simple stuff.
To kind of further your point on that, and I say this as somebody who's ignorant of a lot of these stats, sometimes I'll present a figure to you guys in the WhatsApp group chat or something as somebody who doesn't know very much about this stuff, say, that's ridiculous. And one of you will come back and say, well, actually, that's not really an outlier. That's quite a common value. Or and give me context. So Celtic, I think, at the moment are relying on the fact that, although I've just defended the intelligence of the Celtic support at large, they are relying on the fact that people aren't going to look into these things, or they're relying on the fact that if they do look into these things, that they aren't aware of the larger context of some of the figures, and therefore, they can't challenge what Celtic are doing, unlike you guys, and say, no, this isn't actually being done well.
Ultimately, and this became evident to me, or I thought was evident from multiple conversations I had with people several years ago, which is that the club were not benchmarking themselves in Europe. That this was all about domestic, and it was all about not committing the same mistakes as perceived to have been committed by the old Rangers club. So, and that was even evident in the statement as well, right? So the idea that anything to do with Rangers would somehow work its way into that statement with the total mess that's been going on in the last week is just a huge red flag. That's their heuristic, that's their framing, that's their model as far as how they're judging themselves. And that's how
either that, James, or they're so immature that they thought, we'll put this one in because that's a good wee dig, and people
I don't think so.
That.
Yeah, I that's plausible. I grant you that. I just don't think so. I think they're true believers in that sense, because there's no way that they could have this self-image of being really good at what they're doing if they've done any benchmarking with clubs in Europe. I mean, it's so gratuitously bad in so many different ways, like we covered over the summer, that you can't come up with a narrative that kind of just ignores that and say, oh yeah, and the support really generally know it too. I mean, no knockout tie wins and how many years and how many failings in Champions League qualifiers. I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming, above and beyond benchmarking, transfers, player trading, and all that other stuff.
So I mean, what you're talking about here and what you're asking about, Laura, is almost the sort of operational framework of the company. What we've just discussed there is fundamentally the business is not measuring itself using the right KPIs. That's a fundamental management failure. Yeah. And that's obvious, as James has said, from years. I know for a fact that experts have been into Celtic and presented to them, explained all the trends that happen in the European and international transfer markets, all the various aspects that we've touched on here about age profiles, which countries are attractive in terms of buying players from, which ones aren't, which ones there's value in, which ones aren't, etc., 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 etc. Where the way the market's going and all of those sort of things. They've had this information, and they've not acted on any of it, as far as I can tell. Not acted on any of it. So what do you do? What do you conclude from that? You've been given the information, you've been educated, and you've chosen to ignore it. That's incompetence. It's you call it what you want, ignorance, laziness, whatever. What you're talking about, Laura, in terms of, as James says, you can put the database in, you can go online and take out a StatsBomb subscription in 10 minutes, right? It doesn't mean anything. It gives you nothing, right? What we're talking about here in terms of where Celtic should be, where they should aspire to get to, is two things. One is having an information infrastructure that's fit for purpose, which means you've got access to various sources of data. That's your foundational level, but then you've got the means to take that information, to share it with people, to generate reports, to get them to the right people in a timeless way, in a way that's understandable, in a way that they want, and in language that they understand. And that then starts to speak to the second key element, which is the organizational culture. That it is expected and demanded that information based on facts, data, industry standard outputs forms the basis for the information flows that go through the organization. You wouldn't expect to have something on the back of a fag packet presented to the chief financial officer to say these are our quarterly returns. Then so why would you expect a scouting report on the next opposition not to include industry standard data like StatsBomb, for example? It's the same principle. This is your core business. If you're not using the right information, then your competitors are. you're falling behind. So you've got to make it easy for people to use it, and that involves investment. It involves building, as I say, an infrastructure. Information infrastructure. I'm just talking about computers and boxes and wires. I'm talking about organizational infrastructure, the right roles, the right lines of communication, and then you need the culture. And the culture is, this is just how we do business. Our business relies on having this information, on having people that understand it, can make it understandable to me as a manager, and it's presented in a timely, accurate way, and it helps me make my decisions. That is that, and the culture demands that. I don't think Celtic, any of those things, having a StatsBomb account doesn't do anything.
It doesn't, and I can attest to that because I've had various statistics subscriptions over the years and thought to myself, I actually don't know how to interpret any of this. I'll just let James and Alan do it. Thank you very much, James and Alan. To anybody who's been listening, thank you very much for doing so. Please subscribe on the YouTube channel if you can. You get the weekly podcast from us, and you get a little snippet of anything that you'll find on huddlebreakdown.com in its full
glory.
Content. Full glory, that's the word I was looking for. So you'll find the interview with Ted Knutson. Yeah, you'll find the interview with Ted Knutson. You'll find the full episode of the second podcast of the week that the guys do with Martin, and you'll also find the written work from James and Alan on there on huddlebreakdown.com. We very much appreciate your support if you've already signed up to that. If you haven't, we're at the start of a new season. There's plenty of content to come on that. James, Alan, thank you very much for joining me. We're off to watch Scotland absolutely scalp Belarus.